So hello there guys and welcome back to a brand new episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. I hope you're well. I am certainly enjoying myself and doing well at the moment, and after what has seemed like an age since it was announced that we were going to be racing in Miami, Formula One finally had its inaugural Miami Grand Prix, and it certainly delivered in terms of what people were expecting in some parts, and then in others perhaps less much, but we're going to get into all of that momentarily. And joining me on this episode, part of the DNF1 team, is my co-host Courtney Pine. Courtney, first of all, how are you doing? Are you good?
Hello everyone, yeah, doing well. It was an interesting weekend. I certainly enjoyed qualifying, particularly the live stream. Really happy with how that went. So yeah, I'll be hoping to be around for more of those in the future. Enjoyed the qualifying session. The race not so much, but I'm sure that's something we'll be going into very soon.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, as Courtney rightly pointed out, that we did host a qualifying live stream for Miami. I think we've done a few of them this season. Hopefully we're going to make that a regular thing. And you guys seem to really enjoy that. Now, I'm aware that a lot of you would have been able to tune in because it was Saturday primetime viewing in the evening, whereas most races that we're going to be used to this season will be more Saturday lunchtime. Nonetheless, we had such a great turnout. As many as 2,500 people tuned in over the course of the stream, which was absolutely incredible by our normal standards that we normally get. So we're really, really grateful to those of you that tuned in. We hope you enjoyed it. And of course, if you didn't, make sure that you do for the next one. I think the next one coming up is in Spain. So in a couple of weeks' time, so we'll be able to check that one out on the DNF1 YouTube channel. And of course, thanks for helping us get past 600 subscribers. We managed to get past that feat quite recently. So thank you so much for everyone who's tuned in, subscribe to the channel. Of course, if you haven't, hit that subscribe button, like the video, and you'll see more great podcasts like these, or listen to them, of course, depending on what your poison is. But just as a reminder, as always, we are an independent Formula One podcast, a show made by the fans, for the fans, and we aim to bring you a race review or preview or any of the gossip going on in the world of Formula One for your listening or viewing pleasure, depending, of course, on which platform you choose to follow us on. And don't forget, if you're not first, you're probably DNF1. So how about that for an intro, Courtney? It was a bit corny,
nice.
But I thought I'd try something different.
There you go. Lovely start, mate.
I feel like there's something there. I'm going to roll with that, especially that last part. I'm going to roll with that. So we'll see how we go. Anyway, look.
Practice it in the mirror. Practice it in the mirror before you start.
What do you think I've been doing all morning? This is why we're recording now. It's nothing to do with the fact that Miami was last night, and obviously it was quite late. And we all have regular day jobs, most of us that do this anyway. So obviously we can't record at like 12 at night as much as we like to. But yeah, anyway, look, let's get into this. And I think there's no better place to start, Courtney, than I want to start with Martin Brundle's gridwalk, if I may, because there was a lot going on this weekend in Miami. All of the razzmatazz, all of the glitz and glamour that was beautifully summed up in our preview by our guest Adam Stern for Sports Business Journal. He did a great job telling us about what to expect, and I think loads of us that have seen other sporting events knew what we were going to expect from America when they had their turn to show Formula One what America was all about in terms of what Miami is compared to COTA, for example, as they're completely different cultures altogether. One thing that I was really looking forward to was Martin Brundle's gridwalk, and there was quite a mixed reaction to it.
Yeah.
Some good, some bad, more cringe, I suppose, than brilliant. But at the same time, I don't think it was too bad. I don't think it delivered in some areas, but I think there's certain nuances of it that I was happy about and some that I wasn't. And sometimes I felt for Martin, and other times I was like, those are the breaks. You know, that you got people on there. The last thing they're going to want to do is have a camera and a microphone shoved in their face. So, of course, we should break down a little bit some of the events that went down bit by bit. I mean, it started off well for him, I must say. You know, talking to Emerson Fittipaldi and Mario Andretti, two former world champions that obviously were really excited to be there. Had a talk with Zach Brown as well at McLaren, which might have alluded to an opportunity there where we may see Mario and perhaps Emerson as well driving in the McLaren when we get to COTA later on in the year. So that might be cool to check out. And this,
it would be.
Certainly no mean feat, these modern day Formula One cars. I know some people that are fans of those older generations will say that these cars are a lot easier to drive than they used to be. But Mario Andretti, 82 years of age, if he gets in a Formula One car and is able to do anything half decent with it, then, fair play to him. But he's a former world champion, so I'm sure he'll be absolutely fine. And then we went on to some other segments where they had a talk. I think they had a talk with Christian Horner over the course of the race. The usual stuff that we come to expect on a Formula One grid walk. But then he started to go towards some of the celebrities, and we had who did we have? I think one memorable moment we had with Venus Williams, a woman who has shunned or given the cold shoulder to Martin quite a few times. And I remember watching this and I thought, I mean, I have the utmost respect for Serena as an athlete, and I'm sure she's a lovely person for those that actually know her, not from people that just turn up and shove a microphone in her face. There's obviously a different person there altogether. But when I first saw Venus, I thought, you know, she's obviously having a good time, she's enjoying herself, but I just thought, does Martin really need to do this? And Martin himself was saying, oh, like, I'm just going to do this for you guys. He got in there, and to be fair, she did answer the first of his questions, and then I think she got distracted halfway through, as you'd imagine, and then just completely forgot Martin was there, which I thought was a little bit awkward from. And so Venus is a very tall woman as well, especially compared to Martin, so it was a little bit embarrassing almost for him. But and then we moved on to who were they talking to next? It was DJ Khaled, wasn't it? The famous rapper. That was fun, I must admit. I like DJ Khaled. I mean, I like some of his music. It's not exactly my normal taste, but I did want to see Martin talk to him because I thought that guy would bring a lot of energy, and he was loving it. That's the sort of thing I want to see. Like, I know people talk about celebrities in Formula One that sometimes they mix, sometimes they don't. I know he talks to Ian Poulter, the pro golfer as well, who's a big F1 fan, so obviously... But you obviously get some people that have come to Miami with their passes or whatever, guests of whichever brand or whatever, and they're there to do a job like plug the brand, like Pharrell Williams was doing, for example, promoting a watch manufacturer that he was promoting. Constantly during the interview with Martin, which was quite funny. There are some fans that have obviously asked that question, should we be allowing just regular celebrities or A-listers to turn up on the grid if they're just there to promote a brand? Like, should we just restrict it to those that are actually interested in Formula One? I mean, what's your take on that, Courtney?
Yeah, I think if you're going to have celebrities on the grid, I think they should be up for getting interviewed. I think that's like the whole part of it. You know, you can't just pick and choose what suits you. You know, I do think they should be. Yeah, if you're going to be on the grid, then you should be up for getting interviewed. Like the way that they just, some of them just casually air him as if he's not even there. It's brutal. But you know, it's one of those things. But I think there are two things I can take from what happened. The fact that Martin Brundle, he went from a point where he got aired from David Beckham, and then David Beckham responded. But the fact that Martin Brundle was like happier to interview John Alesi than he was David Beckham, just shows the mindset. These are Formula One people. They don't really care about the celebrities themselves. They're doing it for the audience. They'd much rather talk to ex-racing drivers. But I do think they missed a trick, though, with the interviewing. Why did they not get Francis Bourgeois on the grid? The train spotter / now Formula One enthusiast. They should have had Francis Bourgeois fully interview. Adam, I want to give you a challenge. See if you can get Francis Bourgeois to join us for a podcast. That's my challenge to you.
Well, I feel like there's a segue in there because, and for those of you that obviously won't know, Courtney and I have known each other for a very, very long time. And Courtney had a massive fascination with trains, mostly the Docklands Light Railway based in East London. It was almost a bit of a joke that we used to have in the school playground. So I feel like there's a segue in there, Courtney, where you could appease to France's interest in trains. Now, I don't know how interested Francis is in Formula One cars. He looked like he was having a wonderful time out there. And quite frankly, I love this guy because I think his content is just pure. And it's just a guy enjoying his passions and just seems to have a great time, whether it's a train going past him or quite evidently a Formula One car going past him. And you know what? I would love to have him on the show. So maybe we can try and sort something out, Courtney, if we're lucky. Obviously, I think I might need you to help me out on this one because you've got the inside track with trains a little bit. I'm not really much of a train person, I must admit. So we'll give it a go.
The DLR though.
That's all right.
That's where I'm limited.
That's all right. I'm sure he did a few videos on that on his reels on Instagram. I'm pretty sure he did. But yeah, obviously he was an ambassador as well. And I was gutted I didn't get an interview with him. I was more gutted, not so much about the awkward incident. I think it was with Paolo Banchero, who, if you follow college basketball in the US, and I certainly don't, I don't even follow the NBA, so I have no stake in this whatsoever. I see Michael Jordan, I just go, because I can appreciate what Michael Jordan did as a sports person, in the same way with Tom Brady in the NFL. It's just, you know these people even if you don't follow the sports. But yeah, poor Paolo, Martin thought he was someone else that was quite well known, and then it was only until a bit like halfway through the conversation where his producer saying in his ear, saying to Martin, actually that's not the guy that we thought you were talking to. So it was quite an awkward. But to be fair to Paolo, he was like, he was just engaging anyway. He seemed like a nice guy, and I'm sure he has a great career in the NBA. I hear he's meant to be quite high up in the NBA drafts. If you are based in the US or you like your NBA, hopefully he does well. All the best to him. Let me know Let me know how awkward that was for you guys, considering that Martin thought he was talking to someone else. But, you know, this can happen from time to time. And, of course, with a British audience, not many people are going to look at him and go, oh, that's not who you're talking to. I had no idea. So it was quite awkward. But, yeah, you're right, Corny. It was one of those where you could feel for Martin that he looked really happy after all those awkward exchanges when he found John Lacey. He's like, finally, I can talk to someone that really... And also the, I think, was it the Prince of Bahrain as well that was there?
That's right.
Another big F1 fan. He was just a familiar face. And at the end, I was kind of rooting for Martin to find David Beckham. Because the thing what you can guarantee about David Beckham from what we've learned growing up, and obviously being football fans and knowing about David's footballing career and obviously what's happened after that, is that David kind of knows the score when it comes to paparazzi and media and these events like this. There's always going to be an expectation of him to be the Beckham brand, but at the same time, he's there to sort of serve a purpose. And in this case, it was F1, so you have a kickabout with Charles Leclerc that we saw on social media. He was doing some photos with Lewis Hamilton and Michael Jordan and Tom Brady and all of them lot. Like, David knows there he is. So he sees a Sky F1 microphone that Martin Brundle's holding, who sees a camera. He's like, yeah, actually, you know what? This Sky, I'll talk to them and give up some of his time. And I felt for Martin there. I was kind of glad that he managed to get that interview. But look, we're probably overanalyzing this. We should be talking about the race, but it's just part of the whole. I'm trying to find the right bonanza of Miami that we saw this weekend. It just all summed up in a crazy grid walk. I am a little bit disappointed that they didn't get Megan Thee Stallion there to sort of talk to Martin. I think that would have been a nice little homecoming after all the news and controversy that came from that awkward incident. I don't know if she was there. So if she was there and they didn't pick it up, then, you know, fair enough. But you never know. We might see her at a future event. But anyway, look, let's move on and let's talk about some of the racing. So overall, the race wasn't exactly the most exciting one. I think it's fair to say that safety car towards the end of the race did spicing up things a bit, particularly at the front. It did give us quite a few interesting battles, particularly between Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc that we didn't think that we were going to get. But ultimately, the race was won by Max Verstappen, and a huge win, I think, it was for Max Verstappen and Red Bull, because we saw at Imola that Red Bull had pretty much the perfect weekend. You know, they set the car up right, the car looked quick, Max and Perez were driving brilliantly well where Ferrari were falling apart, and we even saw in this race where Ferrari were making a few mistakes on pit stops, possibly one on strategy that we'll get into a little bit later on, but it was another great performance from Max Verstappen. He dealt with the pressure towards the end, and more critically, manages to close that gap in the championship now to, I believe it's 19 points now to Charles Leclerc. So he's now within a win of catching Charles Leclerc, and more so over, Courtney, Max Verstappen once again proving that when he finishes an F1 race, it's very, very hard to beat. What did you make of his performance this weekend?
Yeah, it was an interesting one for Max Verstappen, because the Friday practice sessions he had problems. He had a couple of rushes with the wall. Obviously, on Saturday, he took that step forward, but then made the mistake in the most crucial moment, which cost him 2 places on the grid. But then, yeah, on Sunday, he was in imperious form. I remember saying it during the live stream on Saturday, anyway. During the live stream on Saturday, regardless of what you feel about the team that he races for, some of the personnel in that team, and you know, some of the fan base of Max, you cannot dispute how talented this geezer is. Like, he is going to be the next Senna, Schumacher, part of the level in this generation. He will define this coming generation, whether it be how many world championships he wins, the battles that are going to be happening within the next decade or so. A lot of the stories around Formula One in the next 10, 15 years will be surrounding Max Verstappen, as last year was. So it is a testament to how talented this guy is. And Red Bull seem to be in a league of their own in terms of engine performance. And it's down to Ferrari, Mercedes, and, you know, even Renault to really up their game, because right now Red Bull are finding it way too easy in terms of straight line speed.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this yesterday, and whilst I'm convinced that Honda power unit is very, very good, I don't think it's just the power unit that is proven to be decisive, because Ferrari, from what we understand, introduced their second version of their power unit to this event. It was the only upgrade that they had, because they had the rear wing that they were going to use that was less drag, which would have helped in this fight with Red Bull, but they ultimately didn't. They went against it because of the asphalt that was on the surface, and Mattia Binotto said that he didn't feel that this wing would work properly, and they had to focus more on handling tyre preservation. And that was something that clearly Ferrari struggled with in Imola. It's something that they struggled with again in Miami. And it's quite strange for a car that's apparently got more downforce, and yet they're having more tyre issues, whereas Red Bull seems to be able to have the best of both worlds in this regard in terms of speed, cornering ability, and obviously tyre preservation as well, which has been quite critical. So it's certainly more to me than just the engine that Red Bull at the moment are enjoying in terms of their extra straight line speed. I think the concept of their car has found so far the perfect balance in terms of speed and downforce. It's proven in previous years it was the same thing, just the other way round, where that car is so fast in the corners, it didn't matter if it was slowest in the speed traps, because it was able to be so far ahead of everyone else, it didn't really matter when they were fighting on track. Now we're in a position where Ferrari clearly have the best car if you take all of the engines out of them. Ferrari have the best car, but they don't have a car that's fast enough in a straight line to beat a Red Bull. They don't have a fast enough car to defend against Red Bull. They certainly don't have a fast enough one to pass the Red Bull, as we saw to the end of the race. So for Red Bull right now, it seems that they've got everything that they need. They've got the car, they've got the driver, they've clearly got a good teammate in Perez this season. He's been phenomenal so far. Everything seems to be coming together. So it feels right now the onus is on Ferrari to up their game, which I'm sure they will definitely be doing very, very soon to see where they stand when they have their first upgrade. Because remember, Ferrari haven't upgraded their car yet officially. They've put little tiny bits specific to certain circuits, upgraded the power unit as we expected them to do, under the rules, of course. But right now, they need to put some new bits on that car, because that's basically a Barcelona test car with an upgraded engine in it. And right now, it's the second best car on the grid. But we'll talk about Ferrari in a minute, a little bit more. What did you make of Sergio Perez? Because he had a bit of a mixed bag today in the race in Miami, because he started off okay, didn't get a good start off the line as Verstappen did. Verstappen got a great start, which got him ahead of Sainz, and of course made a great overtake on Leclerc later on to eventually win the race. But he had that issue with one of the sensors, according to Christian Horner, which cost him as much as 25-30 brake horsepower, which prevented him, even with those new tyres towards the end of the race, to get ahead of Carlos Sainz. He had one moment where he was a bit late going into the corner, and he wasn't able to slow it down in time, and he lost the place. Do you think Checo will be disappointed that he wasn't able to at least get on the podium?
No, I think all things considered, he'd be happy with the way the weekend went. Obviously, he'd be a bit annoyed that, stuff happened, obviously, with the sensors that is completely out of his control. But I'm sure when he reflects on the weekend, all things considered, he'd be very happy, and he should be very happy with how he's performing for the team. We were very critical of Sergio Perez, particularly the middle part of last season, but he's really upped his game this season. It seems like he's had more to say in terms of how this car is going to be developed, the setup of the car. He seems to be a lot more comfortable in it, and it just seems that everything, as you said, Adam, everything is going right for Red Bull at the moment. They could be in a position, if Ferrari aren't careful, we could be getting into a position where we could start seeing Red Bull 1-2 starts, Red Bull 1-2 finishes. And look, if you're not a Red Bull fan, no one else is going to like seeing that, because we saw that with Mercedes. We've seen it in the past with Ferrari, with Schumacher and Barrichello. So I just think this is a really vital stage, going into Barcelona, where traditionally we get a lot of upgrades. I think it's up for the likes of Ferrari and Mercedes in particular to really up their game, because I think we are heading into Red Bull 1-2 territory if these teams really don't up their game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't remember in the preview if I predicted Red Bull to win or Ferrari. Might have been the latter on this one. But, if I'm wrong, fair enough. But I just had this feeling going into qualifying after free practice 3 that this could potentially be a Red Bull 1-2. And I think that's what I went with in my quali prediction. I predicted Perez and then Verstappen, strangely, rather than the other way around. But I thought, Perez beat him in Saudi. I thought, why not? You might be able to do it again. But as you were saying, Courtney, of course, over the course of the last few races, it has felt that Red Bull have, of course, applied some upgrades to their car. It's allowed them to find a few extra temps. Of course, they've had that straight line speed advantage over Ferrari, which has given particularly Max the opportunity to overtake when qualifying has not exactly gone to plan for him. And that was another case of that this weekend, where he looked like he was going to put it on pole, made a mistake, and it cost him a front row spot on the grid, but it didn't matter in the end. And then you've got Perez, who, not necessarily in Miami because he lost a bit of performance there, but if he had that back, there's every chance that he could have got on the podium. And Ferrari right now just cannot seem to overtake that Red Bull, even with DRS. So it is proving to be quite crucial now that Ferrari, at the very least, have to qualify ahead of Red Bull in order to beat them in the race on the Sunday, or you could end up in a situation where you end up with Red Bull 1-2. So the onus is going to be how Ferrari are going to respond to the upgrades on that Red Bull have introduced, and obviously when Ferrari plan to introduce them. We believe it's going to be in Barcelona, but we'll have to wait and see. And it's going to be quite a huge one from what I've been hearing. But let's talk about Ferrari a little bit more in terms of what their drivers did yesterday. How would you sum up their weekends? Because I want to be a little bit fair to Leclerc and Sainz, because the only mistake I saw Leclerc make was that little one in the middle of the race where he lost about a second to Verstappen, but ultimately it didn't really matter. I don't think that would have changed the result of the race at all. But overall, I think the drivers did a very solid job, especially Carlos Sainz, given that he apparently wasn't having access to the drinks. So the old Kimi, you will not have the drink meme, that's now a Carlos one. And he looked absolutely in pieces at the end of that race. He was completely dehydrated. He looked completely flabbergasted, and fair play for him to bringing that home and handling the pressure of a very fast Checo on fresher medium tyres towards the end of the race to get a podium.
Yeah, I think with Charles Leclerc, again, I'm sure he'll want to have that extra straight line speed to challenge Max properly. But I just think, again, all things considered, I think Leclerc can be very happy with the weekend that he had, put in a great qualifying lap, solid pretty much over the weekend. With Carlos Sainz, yeah, he'll be happy with the result, but yet again, another very messy weekend for him. We've been saying it all season, Adam. Carlos Sainz needs a quiet weekend where he just gets on, there's no incidents, he just gets comfortable with the car, because we know he can put in the good performances. So when we go to Spain, look, it's his home race. He really needs to have, even a quiet race. Even if he, I don't know, even if he finishes third, fourth without incident, he just needs a race to settle in to this new challenge that comes with driving for a team that can win races. Because this is something that he's never done before. This is the first race winning car that he's driving, and with that comes new pressures. So I really hope for Carlos Sainz that we go to Barcelona, his home race, he has a nice homecoming, and there's no incidents, because he needs that, because it has been very messy for him so far this season.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And of course, Courtney, you are referring to the crash that he had in FP2, where he lost it in 13 and 14. Same thing that Esteban Ocon did in FP3 as well. So he does need to have a week where he's free from all of that. That being said, despite the loss of run that he did, I think it was a big surprise that he got it onto the front row with Leclerc. He did look like he was off the pace, and he was very nearly on pole himself. So he did a great job, I think, to recover that and, of course, get a solid P3 and a podium. It's kind of what he needed to do, get those points on the board. It preserves Ferrari's championship lead in the Constructors, albeit now down to 6 points. So it's critical now that Carlos Sainz can just shake that one off. He got a good result out of it despite all of that, and just needs to keep pushing on, because Ferrari need both their cars in this fight with Red Bull. Exactly. And it must be said, if it wasn't for reliability, Red Bull would be looking pretty cozy right now. As it stands, plenty to play for, plenty of time to go, but there's hardly anything to choose between them right now. So it's certainly going to be very, very interesting. Before we move on to the likes of Mercedes and some of the rest of the runners and the midfield, of course, let's talk about the other side of Ferrari, because whilst I thought the drivers did a good job, I was a little bit let down by strategy calls and pit stops. Ferrari had some problems in the pits. Charles Leclerc's stop was a bit slow, 3.2 seconds. Carlos Sainz had a problem with one of the right fronts, I believe it was. Wouldn't go on properly. That cost him a few seconds. Ultimately, it didn't massively matter in the grand scheme of things. But that coupled with the potential mistake on strategy, where there was an opportunity, from what I understand, for Charles and Carlos to come in the pits and put on a new set of medium tyres. I believe this is the case. I might be wrong, because I'm not sure if they're the tyres available, but it seemed to me that there was an opportunity under the safety car for Ferrari to put on some fresh tyres if they had them, and perhaps go after Max at the end, but decided not to do that. Ultimately, they didn't lose any places to Checo, which they could have easily done if that was the case. What do you think, Courtney? Did you think Ferrari should have pitted? And do you feel right now they just need to worry about, not so much the car, but also making sure that these small other issues that are costing them time aren't repeating themselves in future races? Because it seems like Ferrari started well, and things are starting to unravel a little bit when things aren't going all their own way.
Adam, you beat me to it. That's exactly what I was going to say. I remember saying earlier on in the season that the biggest question mark for me personally is going to be can Ferrari keep up this development war? And we are starting to see it unravel. I don't want to feel like I'm repeating myself too much, but Barcelona is going to be, or whenever they bring this big raft of upgrades, it's going to be vital for Ferrari to fight back, because we've seen this before. Ferrari have come out the blocks fast and then they just go into mediocrity as the season goes on. Look, as a neutral fan, look, my drivers and my team aren't going to be in the race this year. I've accepted that. So I just want to see a close battle at the front. I'm concerned right now that Ferrari aren't going to deliver. And you're right, not only in terms of having a fast car. Having a fast car is one thing, but Red Bull are imperiously good at getting strategy calls right, getting the fast pit stops. Like, let's be honest, Max Verstappen won the World Championship last season, not only through obviously the driving throughout the season, but they won it because of a fast strategy call, and everything unraveled in Abu Dhabi. So if you want to be beating Red Bull, you have to be on it with strategy and pit stops, because they're good at that as well. You know, there aren't many things that Red Bull are bad at. As much as it pains me to admit, there aren't many things that Red Bull are doing wrong at the moment. So you have to be on point in every aspect of your game if you want to be beating them over the course of a season.
Yeah, very much so. It looks like a very well-oiled machine, Red Bull. And now that they've got back that taste of winning world championships, albeit controversially, they are still doing all of the right things that they need to do to continue winning races and winning world championships in the same way that Mercedes were doing for so long, and Red Bull before them. So Ferrari, in when you take it all away, the answer for Ferrari, the question, can Ferrari win this world championship? The answer is yes, but simply put, they need to have a good car. It needs to be developed well over the course of the season, and they also need the team to be able to pull off those strategy calls and the pit stops, which mean tenths of a second, but ultimately can mean the difference between winning a world championship and not. And at this point in time, it has started to unravel a little bit. Fortunately for them, though, they were able to get a decent amount of points out of it, and hopefully come Barcelona, when those upgrades will come, an important one there, and they will be, that they will put Ferrari right back to a position where they can win races and potentially lay a claim to the championship. Because right now it's looking like it's going Red Bull's way, and particularly Max Verstappen, who is driving phenomenally well, particularly in the races right now. Something that I think must be said that Lewis Hamilton did very, very well throughout his tenure when he was dominating the sport. But let's talk about Mercedes now. Seeing as we've talked about Lewis Hamilton, let's move on to Mercedes. I think, again, depending on who you ask, I think some Mercedes fans might be a little bit disappointed with the promise that was shown on Friday in terms of how good the performance was of the car. They brought quite a few upgrades to this one. Of course, there's going to be more upgrades coming to this car in Barcelona, from what we hear. But this was the first series of upgrades where I think Mercedes are really testing the concept of their car to see if this was the right route to go down in terms of development. And on Friday, particularly in George Russell's hands, it looked like that car, at the very, very least, may have been an outsider in that fight with Ferrari and Red Bull. Or at the very least, probably less than that, I suppose, it was going to be clear of the midfield and not have any issues.
Mm-hmm.
As it stood on Saturday qualifying, they looked almost nowhere. If anything, it was probably one of Lewis Hamilton's stronger qualifying laps in recent times that got him into the top six. George Russell failing to get through to Q3, surprisingly, despite being fastest in FP2 on Friday. And the irony was that George Russell's lap in FP2 would have been enough to get him into Q3. And everyone else improved. Mercedes didn't. They went backwards a little bit. So, all that being said, Courtney, P5 for George Russell, very opportunistic on strategy, did a long one-stopper on the harder tyres, obviously relied on the safety car to come out, he gambled on it, it paid off for him, ended up in P5. Hamilton started 6th, had a few incidents, was a bit unlucky, but overall I think P6, if you were offered that to Lewis Hamilton before the safety car, I think that would have been a fair reflection of his performance. He just swapped Russell and Bottas in the end. So overall, what do you make of Mercedes weekend? Can they be positive about the result, or are there still some underlying questions that need to be answered where it seemed there was going to be a lot more optimism based on what we saw on Friday?
I feel that what happened over the course of the weekend answers exactly what is going on at Mercedes. The pace is there. Now, they've been saying it, and I've been dubious about those remarks. I've been saying the pace is there. We just need to unlock it and understand what's happening with the car. But this weekend was proof of that. You know, the speed was there, particularly with George Russell. Lewis Hamilton got more comfortable with the car as the weekend went on. So it just shows that they can't hold on to that pace consistently, which does suggest that it is there. but they just can't figure out how to make it happen consistently. If anyone can turn this around, it is Mercedes. I do feel that it's too late for them to be in the championship race. I looked at this very similarly to 2009. We've already had a couple similarities there where I feel they will develop a race-winning car, but I think it'll be too late. I feel they'll have more of a say in the Ferrari Red Bull battle. I think they'll become a feature in the championship battle later on, but I don't think they're going to be in a position where they can win either championship. In terms of the way the races went for both of the drivers, great again by George Russell. The fact they said, look, let's stay out and hope for a safety car. Yeah, he got lucky in that regard, but I just think it shows actually the guy is a class act. He is a class act. He's young, but he's already showing that he's capable of winning the championship. Just having that maturity, that mindset, not panicking. He really did, come across well in that race. With Lewis was very unfortunate. There was frustration with his team because, like he rightly said after the race, they're asking me, should I pit yet? When they know where everyone is positioned on track and he isn't. I just feel there's a little bit of frustration creeping in with Lewis Hamilton and some of the fan base. I saw some remarks on social media like making it sound like it was a fix for George Russell. It wasn't a fix. George Russell said live on there, I'm going to stay out and hope for a safety car. The safety car occurred. I just feel I understand the frustration for, as a Lewis Hamilton fan, I understand the frustrations, particularly after what happened in Abu Dhabi. It's very easy to believe that the world is against you. But in that regard, the Mercedes team is fully behind Lewis Hamilton. They do seem to be a bit scruffy with strategy. And it's something that's been creeping in over the past season or so. I feel some of the strategy calls they've been making has been letting them down. So, I'm talking about Ferrari needing to up their games in terms of strategy and pits and whatnot. I think Mercedes do too. I think they shouldn't only be worrying about the pace of their car. If you don't have the fast car, you need to be making the most of strategy calls. George Russell did that, but on his own. George Russell made that call. It just seems that they're not making those bold predictions. It's like Mercedes' confidence have really been taken a whack, and it is showing in every aspect of the team right now.
Well, this is it. And it's funny that we talk about this sort of thing and considering of where you are circumstantially, what you do in a race, depending on how you're performing. I had a really good discussion with a guest that's going to be going to be showing on a new episode coming very, very soon about the difficulties in conducting race strategy when you're out in front and dominating in the way that Mercedes were versus where you are in the midfield, because there's so little in terms of delta timing and performance between those teams that you have to make the right call at the right time. And if you don't and someone else does, it can be the difference between finishing in the top 5 and finishing outside the top 10 and getting no points whatsoever. So I can understand Mercedes are finding themselves in a very strange position right now, something that they've not been used to since possibly 2012, if we're going that far back. So it is quite difficult for them to sort of get that right. And Lewis made some really interesting comments after the race, and I've got them here just to sort of highlight the issue that you've been talking about, Corny. And he was saying about after pitting under the safety car, saying that in that scenario, I have no clue where everyone is. So when the team says it's your choice, I don't have the information to make that decision. That's what your job is. You've got all the details. Today they gave it to me. I don't understand it. And
spot on.
It pretty much sums it up. I mean, because I totally agree with Lewis on this one, in that if your team's the one that has all the data in terms of gaps to other cars and times and speeds and everything else that you've got, all that information, even if Lewis had that information to him in front of him on his dash, he hasn't got time to analyse that. He's busy driving a Formula 1 car at 200 miles an hour around a street circuit. I mean, he's good, but he ain't that good. I mean, come on. So I do think he's right that his team does need to help him out a little bit on moments like this. In fairness to Lewis, in fairness to Mercedes, I should say, it was one of those calls that could have benefited him in a way, but it was one of those where I think George was in the prime position to benefit from a safety car. He stayed out long, and this is the tried and tested strategy that Mercedes and a few others have done in the past, where if you're fast enough and you manage to look after those tyres, you can stay out long enough and take a gamble, and it paid off massively for George today.
I think I had one more thing, actually. I think that the bad strategy call that Mercedes made with Lewis actually hampered George Russell, because Sergio Perez was wounded with the sensor issues. He was battling with Sainz. Now, if Mercedes hadn't made such a clumsy call with Lewis and then keeping Lewis in front and then the battling that was happening between Lewis and George, that actually took precious time away from George Russell, where he could have taken advantage of the Carlos Sainz Sergio Perez battle. So, and it is. And these are the kind of scenarios where if you don't have the car, George Russell's done such a great job in maximising the points for where that team is. But in that regards, Mercedes did mess up. I'm not saying he would have got ahead of Sainz or Perez, but if they made that strategy call correct for both drivers, they could have taken advantage of any incidents that could have happened in front of them.
Yeah, it certainly prevented the opportunity. I don't know if George would have had the pace to have caught and passed Perez or took advantage of that situation, especially when Perez went off the road trying to overtake Carlos Sainz a little bit. He might have been there or thereabouts, but yeah, I totally understand what you mean. I think it takes away that opportunity, and I think you've got to make those calls at the time. And maybe you were right from what you said earlier. Mercedes were a bit hesitant to make those calls over mistakes that they made. You know, I don't genuinely believe that this is a thing, but I know a lot of people over time since Abu Dhabi have said that Mercedes hesitant on a call to bring Lewis in under the safety car. I still would stick to the try and tested method that if you're in track position, you can't really make that gamble, because if you lose track position and Max is ahead of him, because Max wouldn't have pitted. I will say this right now, and I'll have it on record, that if Lewis had pitted under the safety car in Abu Dhabi, Max wouldn't have. And Max would have tried to defend against Lewis. And we may have had a different result, or Max may have won the championship. And everyone's saying to Mercedes, why did you pit Lewis? Why did you give up track position? So you're kind of in a catch-22 like that.
Yeah.
And people might disagree with that, but I'm just saying that's what would have happened. In my opinion, I think that definitely would have happened. So you fast forward all the way now, maybe something like that, even if they don't believe it, might affect their decision making. And they may feel like, actually, maybe we should put it on the driver. It's a difficult situation. And there have been times in the past, even further back than that, when Mercedes have made questionable strategy calls, which has cost Lewis Hamilton some results in some races. Some not so much, because he's able to recover from them. But in this case, he hasn't got the car underneath him right now. And I definitely don't think it's a case of his driving. I think he's fine. I think he proved that on Saturday, and I think he drove a good race. But I think P6 would have been probably about where I expected him to finish. He was a bit fortunate with Bottas making that mistake when George and Lewis were battling each other for P6 at the time, and it gifted a position to both Mercedes drivers. But I think on reflection of how the race was going down, if it weren't for that safety car, I think Bottas would have had P5 anyway, if it weren't for the error. So plenty for Mercedes to think about. Plenty more to mull over. I certainly think that there's something in this car that they can salvage in terms of a concept that can compete with Red Bull and Ferrari. When that's going to happen, I do not think that's going to happen anytime soon, but we may get an indication as to when that might be come Barcelona when the upgrades are on. So, long story short, I think good result for Mercedes under the circumstances. Easily the third best out of all the competitors, but still plenty more for them to do to catch up. Let's move on to Alfa Romeo. We already talked about Bottas making that error, probably the only error that he made this weekend, and it proved to be a costly one, unfortunately. But once again, another great qualifying performance from Valtteri Bottas in P5, and if it wasn't for the safety car, I think it would have been a solid P5 best of the rest anyway. So, I mean, once again, a guy that had little to no TV time whatsoever for over the course of the weekend, despite going to the trouble of having 3 different crash helmets, one for each day of the weekend. And other than that mistake, he put in a stellar performance once again, Valtteri Bottas. I mean, what more is there to say about Valtteri's version 7.7?
Well, we've always known that he's a good qualifier. Again, it's something else we'll be discussing on the live stream. It's actually something that really went underneath the radar during his time at Mercedes. That actually Valtteri Bottas was able to compete with Lewis Hamilton on a regular basis. And, you know, we're talking about the greatest pole sitter of all time. So we know that Valtteri Bottas is good in qualifying. It's just his biggest weakness is his race pace. He's not able to do it. You know, he's not able to put in those laps consistently over the course of a race. You know, with Alfa Romeo, they seem to be in a better position this season, so that obviously helps. But the fact that Valtteri is able to get the car as that high up the grid enables him to defend the lead a lot. It's better, obviously, to start off 5th or 6th than be starting down 12th, 13th, where you traditionally expect Alfa Romeo to be. So I just think this is actually, as well as Alfa Romeo doing, I think this is more reflection of Valtteri Bottas' ability, particularly on a Saturday, over anything else, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's kind of nice to see that his race pace in this car, something that we always said when he was at Mercedes, that he wasn't able to quite match up to Lewis in this regard, and that's understandable. But it was always something that I worried about when he moves on to Alpha, is would he be able to keep up the performance on a Sunday like he did on a Saturday? And so far, he's been absolutely brilliant. Yeah, there's a mistake here and there. I mean, he made that mistake which cost him 2 places in the race, but that was a very difficult corner where a lot more talented drivers than Bottas, and there aren't many of them, mind you, made similar mistakes over the course of the weekend. So I think we'd be being uber harsh if we were to take too much into that. If someone had said to me that Valtteri Bottas would have finished in P7 behind both Mercedes drivers in Miami before a wheel was turned, I probably would have said, yeah, that's probably about right. But the fact that he was there or there amongst them throughout the entirety of the race and probably had Lewis beat for the most of it, I would say that's a pretty impressive performance from Valtteri, all things considered. Zhou, very unlucky. It wasn't a great qualifying for Guan Yu Zhou, didn't get through to Q2. And in the race, I'm not quite sure what the problem was, but he had to retire very, very early. Obviously, looked like one of those issues that was going to turn into something a bit more serious if he carried on. So, yeah, very unfortunate for him. I don't think there's much that we can say on Guan Yu Zhou's weekend, is there? Because he obviously had a car that could have recovered positions and might have been able to take advantage of the opportunities as they came, but we're never really going to know, are we?
No, very quiet weekend. It's been a little bit scruffy at the end of the garage, you know. So he's one of the drivers that's going to have to sort of up his game, because Valtteri Bottas is carrying the team right now.
Yeah, very much so. We do have a little segment that I want to introduce into this one. We're going to analyse certain incidents in the race called Whodunit. I'm going to bring that in a moment because I do want to talk about McLaren before we segue that in. This was a Grand Prix weekend where I feel like from a sponsorship perspective, McLaren looked the dream. Like this was going to be a big weekend for them. And I know that there's been a lot of great work, particularly done by Zach Brown, to improve McLaren's image and obviously raise its stock and profile in the US. And I think he's done a phenomenal job at that. But there were a few things that we saw that were a little bit strange. First of all, those sort of crop tops that Lando and Danny Rick. Now, look, I'm not going to pretend that I understand fashion, but coming from a Formula One perspective, what we're used to seeing drivers wearing, well, week in, week out, when you see what Lewis Hamilton turns up in as a fashion icon, as he seems to be right now in the F1 world, you kind of feel like those surprises are fewer and further between. You kind of just see it for what it is. But I must admit, seeing Daniel and Lando in those crop tops, that even at times they looked almost a little bit uncomfortable walking around in and getting all that attention, was a little bit strange. Different, nothing wrong with that, but a little something that I wasn't expecting to see.
Yeah, it's we see a lot of bizarre things in the Formula One weekend, but it's just a very, very American weekend. Just very, very any way for like a particular driver or team to get attention, they were just trying to do it. It's a very, very different weekend, but I think what happened there was an example of what the F1 organisers are trying to do with Miami, to give it its own unique taste. And if anything, I'm all for it, because if we're going to be having, you know, 2 or 3 races in America, America is obviously, the size of America is pretty much a continent in its own right. So what you want to be having, so when you have the European races, you get the different tastes in different countries. You want to be getting a taste of the different cultures in certain parts of America. So, you know, I welcome Miami bringing this, because then you get the obviously the East Coast taste, you get the Southern taste, and obviously with Vegas, you have that as well. So they obviously want to emphasize that. So look, if it's good for promoting that culture of America, then long may it continue.
Yeah, very much so. It certainly was something that I wasn't expecting to see, but there it is. One thing, however, I do want to praise them on is the crash helmet designs. I think Daniel and Lando especially had 2 of the best ones, if not the best ones. Absolutely love that crash helmet that Lando had, the basketball print. And it's kind of weird because this is one of those sorts of things where how your mind plays tricks on you. Because when I was seeing Lando Norris's helmet, the amount of detail on his crash helmet looked so much like a basketball. I almost felt like that sensation that if anyone's ever held a basketball before, will know exactly what I'm talking about here. But I almost feel like if someone just touched his crash helmet or picked it up, you'd almost be thinking, your mind would trick you into thinking it would feel like a basketball. But it's not. It's a Formula One crash helmet. It's just amazing, the detail and design. So I absolutely loved it. Danny Rick's one was also very, very good. I think another focal point this weekend, I saw a lot of McLaren fans on my Twitter feed complaining about the fact that James Corden was there quite a lot, particularly in the Marin. And I don't know what the detail of that was. I'm sure if he's a fan of the team. I know he has a huge support for Jenson Button, who was there that weekend. Because I think they did a segment for Sport Relief together years ago when Jenson was world champion back in 2009. So I'm not quite sure what the link there is with James Corden and McLaren. I'm not quite sure why some McLaren fans were blaming him as if it was like bad luck or something like that. We saw a lot of James Corden this weekend in McLaren, something I didn't expect to see. But in terms of the race itself, I think we should focus on that now. It was a race that Zak Brown did say that McLaren were going to have a hard time getting a good result out of. It was a very hot circuit, which we've seen already this season. McLaren tend to struggle that more than others. It was another circuit that they felt with the characteristics of the car didn't necessarily match up to Miami. Some cars had that issue. McLaren was certainly one of them. And also a bit of misfortune as well, because Lando qualified in P8. I think he did a great job getting it into Q3 under the circumstances. Was well in the fight for the points. But a poorly timed pit stop and a hard time getting those harder tyres up to temperature where he got swamped by quite a few cars, ultimately ending with the crash that brought out the safety car when he was tagged by Pierre Gasly, who didn't see Lando in his mirrors. So, and Danny Rick, for all that he could try, just had problems all throughout the race this weekend, and he just wasn't able to really get in the mix to the point where he was only P13. So a difficult weekend for McLaren from a racing perspective. From a sponsorship one, probably a little bit more lucrative, I'd imagine, considering the lengths that they went to.
Yeah, I think the American ownership's doing having American management is Zak Brown is doing a great deal of good for McLaren. You're seeing, you got to remember a few years ago, McLaren were actually struggling to get sponsorship. Now you have a look at some of the sponsors on their car; they've probably got some of the biggest branding out of any team on the grid, in all honesty. So it just shows in that respect they're doing well. And if anything, it's only going to help the team going forward, because that brings money, that brings attention, and the best people want to be working for your team if you've got that momentum going for you. But I just think this weekend confirmed that we're getting to understand the characteristics of that McLaren. It really doesn't like the hot weather. And that's obviously going to be a problem. You think that most F1 races take place in where track temperatures, at least in the high 20s on average, you're going to have problems. So that's something they really need to figure out, because unless we have a typically cold and wet summer in Western Europe, they're going to be losing a lot of points.
Yeah, very much so. And it's something they're going to have to get on top of. As I said, it was a difficult weekend for a lot of teams with the high temperatures, particularly the surface of the track being a very, very hot track temperature this weekend, which certainly will play with tyre degradation and make it a lot harder. Surprisingly, teams were able to manage their tyre wear a lot better. A lot of them stretching out for that one stop, and obviously the safety car making some teams pit twice just as an opportunity. But McLaren definitely struggling with that as well. So let's move on to Alpine. And this is sort of where I'm going to segue my Whodunit section, purely and simply because Fernando Alonso makes up about 80 of these incidents that we're going to talk about. But before we do, Esteban Ocon. Difficult weekend for him at the start. Had that crash in FP3, same place as Carlos Sainz. On a note on that incident, I think it was quite a big, I think it was like, I don't know how big the impact was. Someone said as far as like 50 Gs. I'm not sure if it was as big as that. One that warranted a trip to the hospital anyway. But a lot of people were annoyed with that incident because after Carlos Sainz had a very similar incident there, they wanted to introduce some Tech Pro barriers to kind of make it safer if there's another crash there. And I think the race director, I can't remember who it was, said no, didn't want to do that. And then literally a day later, or less than that, Esteban Ocon makes the same incident. And obviously people saying, well, why didn't you put the Tech Pro barriers in there? Nonetheless, he wasn't able to compete in qualifying. So he had to start dead last, at least until the Aston Martin drivers started in the pit lane, so he was already ahead of them, but recovered all the way up to P8. And I think the only thing I can put that down to is Ocon just keeping his nose clean and just being consistent. I mean, he was involved in certain incidents, but not to a degree where he was doing anything he shouldn't have done. Just managed to keep it clean and managed to pick up the points. So I think overall, a very good Sunday for Esteban Ocon. Probably a very impressive, albeit under the radar performance from him.
So Esteban Ocon had the kind of weekend that Carlos Sainz needs. That's exactly what Carlos Sainz needs. So that's the example that he needs to be taken. I think the fact that Fernando Alonso was sort of here, there, everywhere sort of made Esteban's life a lot more easier. But these are the kind of results that Esteban Ocon needs to be churning, because I do feel he's going to be one of the drivers under pressure with this whole Oscar Piastri situation. So more weekends like that, and Esteban Ocon will be just fine.
Well, this is it. And Alonso finds himself in P16 in the Drivers' Championship right now, which is a big surprise because he's always in the mix of the points, but for some reason he's just not picking them up. But look, let's move on to this Whodunit segment, and I think it's perfectly right to start with Fernando Alonso. Now, for the benefit of our listeners and viewers on this one, we're not going to go through these incidents in order of when they happened. I mean, we will try to, but there might be one or two that happen at different points in the race, and people say, oh, actually, you did that one before that one. We're just going to go through it, some as we just list them off. And if I've missed any, then please do let me know. I'll try not to forget some in the future. But there were quite a few in this race. So the first one I'm just thinking off the top of my head that I want to talk about, very start of the race. Fernando Alonso, Lewis Hamilton. Lewis, went into turn one, got a bit stuck because he locked his brakes a little bit, tried behind Perez, but he was on the outside a little bit, and then he got hit from behind by Fernando Alonso. Do you think it was one of those, Courtney, that was just a racing incident that neither of them could really avoid? Yeah.
It was Alonso's fault, but I wouldn't have been asking for a penalty. That was a first lap incident.
Yeah, I don't think there was anything Lewis could have done. He was just the wrong place at the wrong time. And how do you expect Lewis to look all the way back to try and make room for Alonso, who's just thrown his car in there? Fortunately, they just banged wheels, and the only thing that happened was that Lewis lost the place to Fernando out of it, and I think Gasly as well, if I remember rightly. So, I mean, Lewis recovered it. It was a bit unfortunate. Made some really good overtakes, one on Fernando and one on Gasly as well. We should mention that with Lewis. He was very, very good when he had to sort of fight his way back, and to the point where we got to Bottas. But yeah, there's not much we can draw into that. One incident, though, we can draw into where Fernando was a little bit naughty was with Pierre Gasly when he went for a lunge into turn one. And, I mean, that's a no-brainer, hitting Pierre Gasly. He was definitely a day late and $1 short, and then some for Fernando Alonso. So, what did you make of that one, Courtney? Was that a fair cop on that one, penalty for Alonso?
Oh, 100%. I don't know, it just seemed to be a really messy weekend for Fernando Alonso. And then the thing that happened with Gasly, it was like a knock-on effect, because you had the crash which obviously caused Gasly's issues, and then because Gasly was sort of startled by what happened, he wasn't keeping his eyes about it. I mean, he ended up hitting Lando and ruining Lando Norris's race. So I think the fact that Fernando Alonso got a penalty for that was rightly deserved, because it didn't only ruin Gasly's race, but he actually ruined Lando Norris's in the process.
Yeah, pretty much so. It's almost like a 5-second time penalty isn't a suitable punishment for something like that. Of course, you can't blame Alonso for what happens after that, but it did definitely, the damage on Gasly's car definitely did lead to having those issues, which led to that incident as well. Let's talk about, just trying to think the next one that comes to my head, Sebastian Vettel, Mick Schumacher. This one's a little bit harder because Alonso's on Gasly is definitely late. Shouldn't have even gone for that move in the first place. Don't know why he thought of doing that. But with this one, I'm going to be a little bit lenient on Mick Schumacher, and then I'm going to lay my criticism on him afterwards for different reasons. The reason why I'm leaning towards Mick, and I feel like this was more, if there's any blame, it's more 70-30, perhaps Sebastian on this one, because that turn one, the line is obviously the one that Sebastian Vettel takes, but it's so open on the outside that it does allow for someone to make a move up the inside if they get it right. And I think there was room there for Mick to make that move and put his car in that position for an overtake. And I think Seb should have seen that coming when he turned in. He didn't. And that's obviously what caused the crash. So I think that was more Sebastian Vettel's fault than anyone else. The one thing I would say about Mick Schumacher, though, and I know that he came off an incident where he made a mistake passing Ocon, and then lost that place to Seb and then tried to take it back a corner later, is that Mick was in the points. He was running...
That's the thing.
Was it P10 or P9 he was in at the time? Anyway,
he was at P9 at one point.
Yeah, he was in the points and he was doing such a good job. And I thought, this weekend, and we'll segment this into Haas a little bit, but this weekend he had Magnussen beat all ends up. Mm-hmm. He was better than him in qualifying. He was faster than him in the race. It felt to me like finally Mick is showing what he can do without any mistakes. And whilst I definitely defend him on whose fault it was over that move, it was definitely more Seb than his. You almost feel like, why go for it like that? Exactly. Why not just be a bit more methodical? You're faster than Seb. You can find a better place to make that move. And it's kind of a 50-50, really, because when you need to pick up those points and get that confidence, it's just thrown away championship points. And that's something he can ill afford to do right now.
Yeah, it was that just showed the sort of level of desperation that Mick Schumacher's feeling, and it's as brutal as F1 is, if you want to be keeping your seat, you can't be doing things like that. You don't know when these kind of opportunities are going to arise. It was, after the safety car, it was chaos in the midfield. So there's so many opportunities for those who behave. And I think someone who needs to be looking at in that regard is Alex Albon. Alex Albon took full advantage and yet again got himself in the points because of, these kind of incidents. So if Mick Schumacher really wants to be sort of staking the claim, showing that he is a competent enough driver, next time he gets an opportunity like this, he just needs to behave himself.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think Fernando Alonso needs to behave himself a little bit as well, just in that regard, being a bit naughty there, old Nando. But anyway, look, yeah, you're right about Mick Schumacher. I think he just needs to just get those points home, just bring it home. You don't have to go for glory, but I think it was one of those where I understand it was definitely his corner, I felt, out of the two, but it was one of those where it wasn't a slam dunk overtake. And I feel like he lent a lot of trust into Seb Vettel seeing him, and Seb just didn't see it coming. So it's one of those where I think experience will help, but he really needs to try and get those points. There was an incident towards the end that we only saw a replay of, Lance Stroll and Kevin Magnussen. And K-Mag as well, at this point, K-Mag was, well, he would have been in a championship position if he pulled this off, because, or championship point position, I should say, in P10, owing to Alonso's penalties. But he went for a big move at the second DRS point, and he never got that car slowed down enough. He hit Stroll. What's your thoughts on that one, Courtney? Was that K-Mag's fault, or do you think Lance Stroll could have given him more room?
I think it was clumsy, I think particularly from Kevin Magnussen. I would like to give some credit to Lance Stroll, though. I've been very critical of Lance Stroll, over the past year or so. But I think this is one of his better weekends. I think it was actually apart from the issues that occurred with both of their cars, I think this was actually a better weekend for Aston Martin. So Lance Stroll's another one. He just needs to be staying out of these tangles, because I think point scoring opportunities are going to be sort of, you're not going to be getting that many point scoring opportunities if you're the one in these kind of tangles. There's a few drivers at the moment with this tight midfield battle. They just need to be calming down and look. It's fun for us, obviously. It's entertaining for us, so we encourage it. But if these drivers want to be scoring maximum points for their teams, they need to be choosing their battles wisely. There actually has been a lot of clumsy manoeuvres lately.
Yeah, there was quite a few in this race. I think when opportunity came, there were a few clumsy ones. I thought it was clumsy from Magnussen. I think he had a clumsy weekend altogether. I think qualifying was a bit clumsy. Mick Schumacher certainly had the better of him all weekend, probably for the first time this season. And Magnussen was just making too many mistakes, and this was certainly a big one, because ultimately it did cost him a championship point, even more so than what Mick did in some ways. But Aston Martin as well, very unfortunate for them this weekend, because I think they obviously had those issues with the fuel where it was too cold. Imagine that, your fuel being too cold in Miami. They said they had to refrigerate the fuel because of that, so that it wasn't too hot for them. And obviously there is a regulation involved in that where you can't have the fuel being too cold. They couldn't get it warmed up quick enough, which is really, really strange. So someone said put it in the microwave. I'm like, absolutely not. Do not do that, by the way, listeners. Do not do that. Under any circumstances, put petrol in the microwave. So it's just one of those where that they were very unlucky with that. They recovered it really well in the race, so there's certainly pace there, and qualifying showed that there's pace there. Lance Stroll got it into Q3, of course. Sebastian Vettel just outside of that. So it is looking more promising for Aston Martin. There were certainly points available to them. They got one in Stroll, so a great drive from him. And there's going to be more upgrades coming to this car come Barcelona from what we hear. So they are moving forward, Aston Martin. It was one of their better days in terms of the race driving for 95% of it. Yeah. So I think they will take that for what it's worth. Could have been more, but these things can happen sometimes. So no, not a bad day for them. Haas, again, will have to look forward and try and just, now they've got a good car, just take advantage of these opportunities, because they are, both those teams in a way are throwing points away for different reasons, and Alpine as well, particularly Alonso. So we'll see how that goes. We haven't talked about Yuki Tsunoda. Just on a sub note with Pierre Gasly, I should say, before we talk about Tsunoda, I thought Gasly drove really well this weekend. Just very, very unlucky to get tagged by Alonso, and it ruined his race, really. So I hadn't heard anything in terms of whether Gasly was getting penalised for that incident with Lando. So if he has, let me know. But it might be one of those where he might get a grid drop for the next race, even though there's something wrong with the car because of what Alonso did.
It was clumsy, though. Yeah. It was clumsy.
Oh, it was. He wasn't looking in his mirrors. he didn't see Lando coming, so he probably should have looked over. And that can happen sometimes when you're trying to worry about your own issues and you don't notice someone coming on the outside of you. But those are the breaks, unfortunately. But Tsunoda, it's a strange one this weekend for Tsunoda because performance-wise, he qualified in the top 10, didn't he, in qualifying? Both AlphaTauris got in the top 10. Great stuff considering how they both went out in Q1 in Imola. They'll be quite disappointed to go away with no points, wouldn't they, AlphaTauri? And Tsunoda, again, P12, there was opportunity there, but just wasn't able to capitalise on it. Got a poor start.
Yeah, I think the chaos, he was the victim of the chaos at the end there, but he's definitely performing better this season. I've always said that this season's a vital one for Yuki Tsunoda. He just has to keep this up because, because he was so heavily criticised last season after a decent start. But this season, it's difficult with a teammate like Pierre Gasly. Pierre Gasly really does get the best out of that package. He really, really does. So for Tsunoda to be getting at least closer to Gasly is a testament to how well he's driving this season. So I'm really happy for the guy, actually. I'm really happy for him.
Yeah, he's been performing better. I still think he needs to do a bit more. The last couple of races, he has been better. He was good in the race in Imola. This race, he was doing okay, but, as I said, poor start really bogged him down. And Gasly, again, just very, very unlucky, really, to not get points because I thought he was superb this weekend, as I predicted. But there we go. All got to jump on the Gasly bandwagon, why not? But look, it's important that Tsunoda has to be improving over the course of this season because one driver who's very, very much putting himself in the frame for a seat at that team next season is Alex Albon. And averaging P10 in the last 3 races, a P10 in Australia, P11 in Imola, P9 in Miami. And bear in mind, this is coming from a team right now that arguably have the slowest car on the grid. And yet Alex Albon is proving that you can still drag something out of it and get results. And he's done a phenomenal job once again to take advantage of the opportunity, keep his nose clean, have a good strategy, drive a good race, and you can get some championship points. So, Courtney, how impressed are you with Alex Albon? The red-haired Alex Albon, it must be said. Maybe that's something we'll see for the remainder of the season. It obviously is bringing him some luck.
I think we will be.
Yeah.
Oh, we've always known how good Alex. I think if you have a look at AlphaTauri, or was it Toro Rosso at the time? Don't hold me to it. I think it was still Toro Rosso at the time. When he had his first stint at that team, very, very good. That's why he got promoted to the Red Bull team. I think he, along with Gasly, just struggled with the pressures driving for Red Bull and being Max Verstappen's teammate. But this season has been a reminder of how good Alex Albon can be. It'd be interesting to see if he does get a chance back at AlphaTauri. Maybe you want to stay at Williams. I don't know, but I feel there's going to be options for him. I think that performance he put in Australia in particular was exceptional. And, it's all he can do is keep on grabbing the headlines because, this is what George Russell was doing. George Russell was grabbing the headlines, and that's how he got that seat confirmed at Mercedes. But I think if you have a look at the other side of the garage, I know there's this whole thing about sort of having a go about the Canadians, but I just don't think Latifi is good enough. I really don't think Latifi is good enough. If you was to ask me the question, which Formula 1 driver would you get rid of right now, it would be Latifi without hesitation. He's just not good enough, Adam. I'm sorry, but he's not.
Yeah, he did fall away from the pack towards the end. He finished ahead of Mick Schumacher, but that was because Mick Schumacher had to make a late pit stop. And of course, Magnussen, Vettel, Gasly, Norris all retired, but they probably would have finished ahead of him if they kept it on the road anyway. So, not great for Latifi. He kept his nose clean in all the chaos. P14, fair enough. If you want to finish first you have to finish, of course. But, nothing really spectacular for him. It's almost that thing where even said on during the race, I was saying to... when I was watching it, I was just saying that, this race needs a safety car. Where's Latifi? What's he doing? It's like, it's almost, and I mean this in the nicest way possible, because I know if you're a Latifi fan or if you're Canadian and you want your guys to do well, it's not nice when we come on here and sort of take the mick, really. And he's not a bad driver, Latifi, but I think what we're seeing this year is that there is a certain quality in driving these cars, and right now, I want to be nice about this, but I, like you, Courtney, I don't like to see talent go to waste. And I feel like there are some talented drivers in there that could jump in and do a better job. And Alex Albon, again, has been away from Formula 1 for a year. All right, he was doing testing every time Red Bull wanted to prove a point to complain about Lewis Hamilton. He was doing a test on it. But, to come back in and just really do what he's doing, it just makes you wonder, is that Williams good? I'll give you an example, actually. I can't remember if this was actually on the episode, but it was a really, really good point that Richard Spanish Ready made when I was talking with him a couple of weeks ago on that episode. And he made a point about Williams, I think back in 2018 when Stroll and Sirotkin were driving. And ultimately what they proved when George Russell got in that car and was doing okay was not the fact that the Williams was a bad car. It was the fact that the drivers they had in it were nowhere near good enough to extract the performance out of it. And of course, Stroll was improved and he's doing okay at Aston for the time being. Sirotkin is obviously doing other things. But it does go to show the value of a quality driver in a car. Because people talking about outdriving the car. Albon isn't outdriving this car. He's just getting the absolute maximum out of it. That's what people should be saying, not outdriving the car. Latifi is not doing a terrible job, but he's not exactly doing one that you can measure up against his teammate and say, actually, this is what we want. So there are drivers out there like Oscar Piastri, like Nick De Vries, for example, maybe a few others in there looking in Formula 2 that might be looking at F1 in the upcoming years that might be thinking, there's a seat I'd want to get involved in. So Williams are going to have to make a decision at some point, depending, of course, on how much money is coming into that team for your TV. I don't think it's as much as it is, as people think it is. So certainly food for thought. One thing I did find interesting as well, on a separate note with Alex Albon, he said after the race that apparently some of his team members had said to him that if he got in the points in Miami, they'd all dye their hair red. So will be interesting to see, first of all, if that's true, because apparently he was saying that some of his team were sort of trying to back out of that one.
Of course they were.
But we'll see. We'll see. Might be quite interesting just see everyone at Williams with red hair. That might be quite funny. I think they should just do it anyway. Why not? He's doing a stellar job. Should reward it. Why not? But anyway, guys, look, that is the end of the review. Hopefully that was okay for you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed that. If you did, make sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. Of course, our social medias are there for you to see, DNF1_official if you're watching on YouTube. And of course, if you're listening on the audio platforms as well, make sure to follow us on your favorite podcasting platform as well. But until next time, guys, we've been DNF1. We hope you stay safe. Thanks for tuning in. And we'll see you in the next episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast, where I will be interviewing a Formula 1 race engineer, a World Championship winning race engineer as well for Haas and for Mercedes as well. So great experience there. You definitely won't want to miss that. That's going to be coming to you on Friday. So make sure to tune out for that one. It's a very, very good one. But until next time, guys, take care. See you in the next one.
See you soon.